What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Travis. Of course, you are watching TW Motorsports, and today we're continuing the progress on Cohen's car. Okay, so in the last video, you guys saw I ended it just because of time and whatnot. The trans is still in there. We still got the jack in there, which I need to get back to my buddy. But today, we need to finish up getting the rest of this stuff installed. So that means we need to get under there. We need to measure our torque converter pullout, get the converter bolts in place, get those torqued, and then we can move our way to the exhaust. You can see exhaust up there, and then the cradle. And I actually think he wants to lower it a little more, so we may trim. We're lowering it more, right? Yeah. So we may trim some off those bump stops, which you guys are going to cringe. But as you can see, our pile has gotten bigger. Guys, I doubt we're going to get to any of this in this video, but this is all the stuff to install the cam that he got. He's been spending some money. But anyway, let's get into the car. Let's look at the converter pullout, because look, Circle D measures the converter pullout a certain way. And so we're gonna get under there and make sure that it is within spec. If it is, great, we'll put the bolts in. If not, we may have to use the supplied shims that they provided. Guys, they provide bolts, ARP bolts, and shims, a couple different sizes. So we'll just have to see when we get under there. These are the bolts and the shims that came with it, if you have to use them. All right, so here's the easiest way to measure. We have an 1/8 inch drill bit here. That is what should fit between the pad and on this, technically, I guess you could call it a flex plate or a flywheel. I don't really know what you'd call it since it's a torque tube design, but that's what should fit in between the two. If we have more than that, okay, we need to possibly use a shim to get to this amount of pullout. Does that make sense? I'll try to show you under the car. So on this car, the easiest way is to put this up in here, and look, see how much room we've got there? That seems a little bit obsessive. So we're gonna use the smaller converter bolts. Yeah, that's way too much play. So we're gonna grab one of those shims out of there, the smaller shims, and we're gonna put one of those up in there, and then we're gonna measure it with one of the bolts and the shim, and then we'll measure it before we start to actually tighten it down. So we grabbed a 3/16 drill bit too, because I want to make sure, but if it's bigger than this, we need shims. If it's smaller than that, you have a problem, okay? So we need to be in between these two. It's a little loose with that in there, so we use the smaller shims, but we're gonna put that in there and make sure. It seems really close now, because I can put this in there and I still have a little bit of play, but I wanna make sure before. So get 2 drill bits, a 3/16 and an 1/8 inch, and try both. We test fit both shims just for peace of mind. Okay, so the 3/8 drill bit went in there, so that's too much. We had clearance issues. And so we used the smaller shim first, and I thought maybe we could get away with the bigger shim. The smallest shim is what we're using. Guys, make sure you test this, because you want at least an 1/8, okay, so the small drill bit, but you don't want as much as the 3/16, which is the big drill bit. This is right between the two. We've got all the converter bolts in. Now Cohen is grabbing an extension so we can torque these to 50 foot-pounds. Now guys, we did use a little blue Loctite on these. I think it's a good idea. The factory uses Loctite. We just used a little blue. I don't think red's necessary here. So we're gonna go through, turn it, torque them all to 50 foot-pounds. Now that we got the converter bolts tightened, we went through that sequence twice, guys. I always like to do that. Cohen is putting back the closeouts for both the front and the rear. The front, obviously, we needed access to spin it around, so we get to the converter bolts. The rear, we needed for the converter bolts. So he's putting those in, and we're gonna move our attention over to the cradle. I take that back, actually. Because of the way things are routed and whatnot, we're gonna go ahead and put the exhaust in. So we left, you could see when I was under there how much of the exhaust we had off. We're gonna put that intermediate pipe in, and then followed by the cat back over there. Just because, guys, I think you should take the exhaust out. Like I said in the last video when we were starting this whole thing, it just makes your life a lot easier if you have the exhaust out of the way to get to the trans bolts and whatnot. So we're gonna shove that stuff back through there, and it's just some 15mm clamps, because this is aftermarket exhaust. So we're gonna get that in there. Now before we go back in with the cradle, there's a couple things you need to take note of. One, obviously the brake lines, right? We gotta line those back up. But we left the 10mm in for the outer brake lines. Those are for the outer lines here. This goes in. We didn't want to put that much stretch on it, but he wants to lower this thing a little more. And so in order to do that, what we would like to do is we're going to cut the bottom piece of the pad off. okay? Just that bottom lip. But we're gonna take that out. I believe it's a 10 millimeter. It's probably a good idea to spray this with some WD-40, but what we'll be able to do now that it's out of the car is the suspension doesn't have any weight on it. We should be able to thread that thing all the way out and just take it out, get the pad in our hand, cut that off, put it back in, if that makes sense. So at least that's what I'm thinking. We have a ton of clearance on both sides with this thing lifted up like this. So I think this should work. After getting these guys out, you can see we've cut the bottom. Bring that one over here. He's got the stock, well, they're both stock, but we cut this bottom pad off. We're gonna leave the rubber, okay? And we're gonna thread them back in. It's probably not gonna give us a ton of drop, but one of those plates should give us another, I don't know, maybe ½ inch if we're lucky. And that'll probably be good. This is what people talk about stock bolts. They make an aftermarket bolt, but I don't know. Some people say when you cut them, it screws them up. I've got an extra set. So if it gets crazy and he doesn't want to buy coilovers, that's really the way to go, guys. But anyway, you just use a Sawzall to cut that last, and they're metal. So it goes metal, rubber, metal, and the metal's coated in rubber. But just so you guys know, we just cut the metal pad off the bottom. So we're gonna leave the bottom rubber and give it something to wear against before it gets to this next metal pad that has rubber on it, if that makes sense. So we're gonna duplicate this, obviously on the other one, and then back in the car, these will go and they just screw up all the way to the end. And then we should be set to get that back under the car. Now that we got those back in place, you can see we've swung this thing under, but guys, we realized that our jack will not go high enough to get that thing back into place. And so we're gonna have to pull it back out, get some blocks, but a couple things you need to pay attention to. One, all your wiring and whatnot goes on the bottom side of the axle. Like I said, there's clips inside right here. You can see them there, and that holds that wiring harness, okay, out away from everything. The other thing is your e-brake actually goes on the outside and through this outer hole right here. So this hole that has the wire keeper, that's where the wiring goes, but then your e-brake cable will come through that as well. And so what we got to do is we're just going to have to get a few blocks on that, lift that thing up a little higher, get our transmission bolts started, get the bolts that hold the cradle in, and then we'll worry about torquing those, and we'll talk about that when we get to that point. But yeah, it's kind of a bummer when you get it up into place and it doesn't go in like what you thought. Guys, we took it out with that jack and we tried it with that. The problem is it was tilting and our trans bolts weren't lining up. So it just makes it a little harder to get things lined up on a jack like that. And it's, you know, it's teetering back and forth. That jack goes way higher, but that won't work. Well, after a little creativity on getting this thing kind of up into place, our jack seems to be bleeding off. But we've got the cradle bolt started. You can see the one in the back and the front, and the trans mount as well. Getting things lined up is a little bit more cumbersome, guys, but you know, with two people, it definitely helped. Just kind of maneuvering things back and forth. The transmission mounts have a little give to them, so you can kind of move those around. It's really more important to get the cradle bolts outside lined up. So we've got those lined up. Now look, you're supposed to replace the nut on both of these, but those need to get torqued to 81 foot-pounds. I'm gonna go ahead and do that. And then Cohen's going to paint these, so I think we're gonna take those off next. So we're gonna go ahead and take the axle out for now. And he may go ahead and start hooking up a few more things, or we may just disassemble this real quick in order to get the brakes out of the way, which we honestly, guys, we should have done this while this was apart. And he just doesn't like the rusty look, which I get. So anyway, we may turn the camera off for a little bit while he does that. Takes those apart, because we really have to have the axle in place. I don't think we can do that without loosening the upper A-arm. So it just makes sense to kind of leave things as they are. So what we actually did was we took the brakes off, but I think we're gonna have to get new pads. We're gonna have to have new pads for sure, which sucks. They're just almost to the wear indicators, which they're squeaking a little bit. Anyway, I thought it was more of a it's setting and then just getting some moisture in them, but from the looks of it, it looks like the backs are dragging a little bit. So we went ahead, got the axles pushed back in, got the cradle bolts torqued to the 81 foot-pounds. We still got to go back and do 37 on the trans mounts, but guys, those need to be done after the cradle bolts. Okay, and then Cohen is getting the shocks in place. He's got the other one on the other side. Then he's going to get the upper A-arm in place. We're going to have to check on torque specs for that next. Well, we've got a majority of the back assembled. We don't have the upper A-arms or the shocks torqued down, but for the most part, the back's assembled. We're just waiting on brakes. So what he's decided to do is, since we have all of this stuff, to go ahead and start the cam swap process. So you can see he's already got a start here. He got the cover off the radiator. He got the fuel rail covers off, got the cold air intake off, as you can see. So now he's just going to work his way through. I think the next thing he'll take off is he'll take off all the spark plug wires. He'll go ahead and loosen up or unplug the coil packs here like that. And then take, I think they're 10 millimeters that hold the coil pack brackets. You don't have to take the coil packs off, but there's a bracket, and they're these studs here. So there should be, I want to say 5 or 6 of those. He'll get those out of the way, and then we will move on. You can see we've pulled quite a few other things out of this. I haven't really been keeping up with this, guys, sorry. But we pulled the coolant tank out. We pulled the crossover line for the coolant that goes the other side. We also got, we knocked the AC loose, so we're gonna have to refill it. Guys, I just don't feel comfortable pulling the AC compressor or condenser out and folding it up like you see a lot of shops do. The chances of you screwing things up are, or bending a line. Look, there's gonna be people argue with me. I'm telling you guys, I did it on my ZR1. I took it out. I didn't just fold it up out of the way. I just don't like putting that kind of pressure on those lines. But anyway, we're gonna continue. We got a 13 millimeter to take out here, and then at the bottom, and then our radiator will be loose. We went ahead and got all the coolant drained out, got all the lines unhooked. So really the only thing holding this up now is, and actually I've already got this one loose. We'll just get this line off, and we'll take, there's one more just like this, a hard line that comes in the bottom. We'll get that one off, and then the radiator condenser will be out of the way, and that'll give us a lot more room. Now, we got that out, but guys, the rack is right in the way on these things. So just to make things safer, we're gonna go ahead and jack the rear of this thing up, even though we don't have the brakes yet. We're gonna jack it up and go ahead and torque down. Actually, now that I think about it, doesn't necessarily matter, but we're going to anyway. We're gonna jack up the rear of this thing. We're gonna torque the top, the upper A-arms to 48 foot-pounds. And then we're gonna put the wheels back on without the actual calipers. And we're gonna kind of transition our blocks from there to under the tires. And then what that'll allow us to do is get the blocks out from under. We're gonna basically alternate what we're doing here. So we can get these wheels off the ground, because we're gonna have to knock that rack out of the way in order to get to the balancer. It's just a tight fit down there. I'll take a flashlight down there here in a little bit. So we've reversed our situation here, putting the back tires on the DSE wheel stands, getting the front up in the air, getting the tires off. He's already got the outer tie rods loose. Actually, this one spun on him. He had to put a, I don't know what size that was, probably a 6 or a 4 millimeter in the center. So if you have that issue, but we got that loose. He's working on now. We're just kind of taking stuff out that we may or may not need to, but it's relatively easy. So he's taking the trans cooler loose, which is 10 millimeter right there. Actually, did you already get it? Getting that loose, and then we're gonna take the sway bar out of the way just to have it out. It's 13 on the mounts, like the D-rings, and the outers are 18, and they're probably gonna spin as well, but you could put a 10 in the middle and get those loose, and we'll just have this sway bar out of the way. Just gives us a lot more room to work. But then I think once we get that stuff out of the way, we could probably go ahead and get the water pump out, which is gonna make a mess, and give us a lot more access to the front of the motor. Now that we got the sway bar out of the way and that trans cooler unhooked, I got to looking, and guys, it's been a minute since I've done one of these, but you can see where the rack is. It's like right in the middle of everything. What a pain, GM, why would you do that? But not a huge deal. But what I will tell you is we're gonna have to unhook the steering shaft, which is, I believe that's an 11 millimeter right there. You can see it down there. But before we do that, we got to tie up the steering wheel. Cohen went to grab his key because obviously the battery's unhooked, but we don't want to ruin the clock spring. And so if the steering wheel got weird and decided to go one way or the other, we don't want to screw anything up. So we're going to unhook it. We're going to tie up the steering wheel where it stays in place, and then we will unhook that. We should be good to go at that point. A couple things we got going on here. We got the steering shaft unhooked with the 11 millimeter. We got the power steering cooler unhooked. We actually took that out of the rack. Over here in the corner, you can just barely see it. 18 millimeter takes that out. Got the rack bolts out, which were 18s. Cohen now is going to take off the alternator just to give us a little more room. I really want to get the power steering completely out of the way. I think it'll make our life easier. So he's going to go ahead and take the 13 millimeter off the back. Obviously, we already have it unplugged, but he's going to get the 13 off the back, and then the two 15s that hold it in place, and we'll just get it out of the way. A little bit of catch up on where we were at on Cohen's car here. We've got all the front basically disassembled. As a matter of fact, there's only, I think, 2 bolts holding this bracket on, which probably doesn't need to be out of the way. But what I will tell you guys is I thought my impact might knock that crank balancer or the balancer off the crank pulley, but it will not. So we are going to have to crawl under there and at least attempt to get the starter out of place so we can put our locking tool in, and then we can, you know, get a pry bar and actually try to get that balancer bolt loose. Once we get that loose though, guys, we are going to be very, very close to having this camshaft out of this car. We're getting close. To catch up on what we've been doing, Cohen is currently pulling the spark plugs out. We got the the harmonic balancer bolt loose by putting the flywheel locking tool in place of the starter. So I had to get in there and get the starter out. The problem was, guys, is with these headers, you couldn't get the starter out. So what Cohen did was, while I was down below, he loosened up the header bolts to kind of give some movement in that header in order to get that last starter bolt out, get the locking tool in there, and we were able to crank the bolt out. So now we need to set up our balancer puller, which, guys, I use a Chrysler one because it seems to work best. Once we get that in there, we'll get that balancer pulled off. I think he's going to go ahead and remove that other bracket that held the alternator and the power steering pump, just so we have additional room and clearance. You don't have to do that necessarily, but look, it will give us a little bit more room to work, I feel like. So we're going to do that, get the balancer off, and then I guess some of the fun starts. He's going to maybe take the front cover off, unhook the cam position sensor you see down there. Yeah, it's getting real now. This is what I like to use to pull the balancer off if it's a stock balancer. If it's an aftermarket like what we're putting on, this is not what I use. I don't even remember last time I pulled one of those off. I think I used the one where it threads in because they have threaded holes in the front. This one, though, works great for hooking around the outside, or sorry, the inside of the stock balancer, which the stock balancers suck. Don't ever pull a stock balancer off and put another one on. They're garbage. And GM had tons of issues with them. But anyway, we're going to get this balancer out of place. Cohen is working on getting the rocker arms loose. We got the front cover off. We got both, obviously, the 8 millimeters out that hold the valve covers on. And guys, I like to crack these loose by hand, so Cohen is not using that to get them loose. For one, that wouldn't loosen them, but they're pretty tight. They only go to 22 foot-pounds, but they stick in there. And so I've heard horror stories of people using impacts here and pulling the threads out of the head. We obviously don't want to do that. So Cohen loosened them by hand, and now he's going back and just, you know, they're pretty long-winded, so it makes your life a lot easier if you just take them off with some sort of electric device. Let's catch up on where we're at. All right, we got the 10 millimeter out that holds the oil pump to the pickup tube. I decided to order another O-ring. I just feel more comfortable about it. We may drop the pan a little bit as we go back together too, but Cohen got the valve covers off. He got the push rods out, obviously the rockers off. And then I actually used an 18 millimeter and took this guy loose, or sorry, 24 millimeters, the same as a crank bolt. But we're to the point where we can go ahead and get the cam out. What we need to do though, is we need to take these Torx out, which I'm not gonna be reusing those or the plate. The plate here, we've ordered a new one. The bolts, we've ordered new ones. I just think it's a good idea, guys, to do that. But the next thing we're gonna have out is the camshaft. Obviously, we took the tensioner off, the timing chain, the sprocket. got that all out of the way. So now it's really kind of go time. I've got my tool here set, getting ready. You can see I've got air hooked up to the cylinder, and I've got the tool started so we can get the keepers out, basically push these rockers, or push the springs down, get the keepers out and the retainers. And I'll kind of show you that process as we go. But the other thing is, once we get this out, we need to put dowels in there, roll that camshaft around, put some dowels in there, because guys, if you don't, your lifters are gonna fall into the cam journal, and that's a nightmare. That means you're gonna have to pull the heads to get the lifters back into place. So we're hoping that we can do that. I will show you those dowels installed once we get to that point. These are the dowels that I'm talking about, and you can see you have to remove that plate in order to get them into place. But the lifters have an opening in the middle of them. So what this does is it holds them in place. I don't know if GM designed it this way. I use wooden dowels. There's actually a tool that's metal, but guys, you can get a cheap wooden dowel. I don't even remember the size. I've got a couple different sizes, but here's what we're gonna do now. We're gonna walk this cam back out and go grab the new one. And we'll show you side by side what we're dealing with, because the LS3 cam is a single bolt cam. The replacement cam is a 3-bolt cam. So we can't technically use any of this stuff, like the front timing gear. We can't use that. We gotta get a new one, which you'll see all that, and I'll be listing these parts in the description down below. But let's get this old one out. The old camshaft is out. It is sitting over here with the rest of the junk that we pulled off the car, that whole stack of stuff over there. Cohen has the new cam out, and he's cleaning it off. Guys, I think this is a good idea. You see a lot of people that just pull these out of the wrapper and put them on, but sometimes there's metal burrs on it, so you want to make sure that we don't want to use that towel now. No. Want to make sure that we get it nice and clean. And you're probably wondering what the specs are on it. I don't even know. It's it required a set of dual springs, and it requires a, I think they're dual springs, and then it required a 20, or at least a 3200 stall. So let's look at the cam specs here. It is a 627 intake lift, 621 exhaust, 229 over 244 duration. And this is all on a 115 LSA. So I don't know, it's going to be pretty thumpy, I think, even though 115. We did this cam because he thinks down the road he wants to do a blower, and this cam is spec for a blower. So guys, I get all my cams from GPTuning. I will list his link in the description down below. Great guy, sends quality product. I never have to second guess what he sends me. I just tell him what I need, and boom, he sends it. Now we're liberally applying some melling. Here's what I like to do. That's good. That's good. I like to do it like maybe halfway, and then we'll get it stuck in that much, and then we'll do the rest once we get like this cam bearing seated in the front one. We'll smear that around. If you think you need more, put some more on it. It's not going to hurt anything to use more. Cohen is using our new press, a couple sockets, to possibly knock out one of these factory trunnions, and it's a pain to get lined up. There you got it. It doesn't take much to knock these guys out. There you go. He's got it started. You can hear it, and then you will see it. Boom, he's done. What we're doing here is, I like to keep these in order. So because we have to reset this up to press the new ones in, what he's doing is he's gonna go ahead and knock them all out. He's gonna line them up the same method they came off of the bar over there, you know, the actual rocker stand. So he's gonna stack these up, and these are offset because they're LS3. But so you can see he's got 2 accomplished. And I wanna show you guys these needle bearings that cause all this issue. Now, word is that only a couple failures have happened, but you can see these needle bearings. When those guys come out, they scatter all over your motor. And so he's got some work to do here with, oh, I got 2 done, only, what? 18 to go? No, more than that. How many total is there? 16? 2 per 8, yeah, 16. So you got 2 done, 14 left. All right. He's gonna keep doing it. He's got them all pressed out, you can see, and now we are starting by putting one bushing in. And the only reason we're doing one bushing and then switching is so we don't have to adjust the press each time. Because what you need to do is you need to put one bushing in, and then the press has to go up quite a bit higher, because then we have to put the body of it in. And once the body of it's in, then we have to flip it over and put the other copper bushing in. So he's got one pressed in now, and you're just pressing them till they're flush. You'll see when he lifts up here. See that guy? That is what we needed. So make sure that they're flush like they are right there. That looks good. And he's just gonna go through and go ahead and press one side in, and then we'll come back and do the other side. We're finishing the trunnion install, so what we're doing is he's pressing that second bushing in after we put the actual trunnion in. And then I've made a plate for it to set in, and then you can see he's got another washer that he's gonna center in the top, gonna continue pushing that down into place. And you'll see it start to go in. And it should be good. And then he'll release it, and our bushing and our trunnion will be in place. Oh, yep. You're gonna have a little bit of this copper. He's also using some assembly lube as he's pressing that in, but now all he's got to do is put the keepers in on each side, and you should be good to go. On to under the hood, we need to get the cam retainer plate in place. Before you do that, try to clean off the old mating surface there. You can see we still got the water pump bolts in there. I can go ahead and thread those out, but once we get that into place, we got new bolts, a new plate. I suggest replacing that every time you do it. We'll talk about torque specs when we get to that point. Then we can put the chain on and the actual timing gear, and then followed by the oil pump. Now the oil pump, I think, guys, we're gonna have to back the pan off a little bit so we can get a little additional hookup for the pickup tube. You don't want to pinch your O-ring, which we also got a replacement O-ring, but I'll try to show you some of this stuff as we go together with it, because we got a new timing chain, we got a new tensioner. It's not the spring-loaded one. Obviously, since we're going to a 3-bolt cam, we had to have a different timing gear. So all that stuff I'll try to list in the description down below too. Now, I don't know why, but it seems like the newer stuff has a deeper oil pan or something, because guys, I feel really comfortable without dropping this pan and not pinching the seal or the O-ring for the pickup tube. Now, does it make it kind of hard to get the 10mm in? Yes, but look how much push down I have. I can get it started nice and square once I start these bolts. So we're gonna do that. We're not gonna pull the pan loose anymore. We have plenty of room. It's gonna be kind of tight getting the 10mm that comes up into the pickup tube started, but what the deal is you want to make sure you don't pinch the O-ring, and we did replace it like I said, but you don't want it to go in like crooked and then you pinch it and then you have no oil pressure. That'd be miserable to pull this apart just to fix a screw up like that. But we're going to go ahead and get our bolts started for the pump, and then I'm going to push this back down. You can see I have plenty of room, and we should be able to get nice and square. We've got the oil pump torqued down. What was that, 18 foot-pounds?
Yeah.
And you got them. Yeah. He torqued down the oil pump at 18. The pickup tube, guys, went in nice and square. I left it till last, pushed it in place. It fit snug and square, okay? I went ahead and torqued that one to 106 inch-pounds. That's the best spec I could find. If you don't have anything like a crow's foot, you can do it by hand. Just don't get crazy. Now Cohen is scraping off the gasket for the, you can see it left a little. We actually had to pry off the old water pump gaskets. Could we reuse them? Probably, because this car is such a low mile car, but it's another one of those things, guys. They're cheap. They're like $7. Bought new GM ones. We're gonna put those on when we put the water pump back in. But anyway, he's scraping off the old gasket material. He's gonna work his way around where the timing cover sets. And then we also need to grab a punch. Got this over here, the old timing, because we decided to get just a seal, okay, and a new gasket for the outer instead of buying a whole front cover. There's just no sense in it, and I've got the tool to position that. So either way, we've got this thing all ready to clean up. I'm gonna do that while he's doing the other. Don't forget the oil pan mating surface. We got to get that. and I'll show you once we get ready to install. We're going to put a little bead of silicone down there in the corner so we don't have any leaks. But yeah, we're plugging along here. Now, you guys probably can't see it down there, but I've got some silicone in the corners that we need, and I've got my alignment tool here. Cohen has the new, well, not new, but I knocked the old seal out. We need that out. But what we're doing now is, you can see the new gaskets in place, and I got the bolt started in that. We're going to set this thing on there, and we're going to snug it down. But before we snug it down, we're obviously going to put our alignment tool back in there. So I'm going to get this in place, get a couple of bolts started, and obviously there's 2 bolts that come in from the bottom of the pan that we'll have to get into place as well. But first, I like to line this up. We'll do kind of, like I said, snug this down, and then we'll put the alignment tool in before we tighten it. Now that we went ahead and tightened this down, okay, 18 foot-pounds, all the perimeter bolts, and including the ones in the pan. You can use a crow's foot on those. After we did that, we took the alignment tool out, and then Cohen, while I held it, I kind of started it, and then you flip that tool over, this guy here. Once you flip that over, you can use it to knock your new seal in. So no sense of buying a new one with that, and you have to have a separate alignment tool if you leave the seal in. So he's struggling here, really struggling with getting the water pump gaskets off. I'm not really sure why it takes so long, but he's struggling. It's a struggle. It's a struggle. Anyway, we got to get that cleaned off. But I think, honestly, guys, we could go ahead and move on to the valve springs if we wanted. But we'll let him clean on those gaskets for a little bit.